안녕하세요. 저는 수잔 카이저 그린랜드입니다. 오늘 여러분과 함께 마음 챙김 연습을 할 수 있어 기쁩니다. 제가 마음 챙김과 명상을 좋아하는 이유는 제가 이끌고 싶은 삶의 일부인 보편적인 주제를 인식하고 발전시키는 데 도움이 되기 때문입니다. 제가 내 안에 정말 세우고 싶은 보편적인 주제 중 하나는 제가 사는 방식과 가정, 학교, 관계에서의 제 삶과의 균형입니다. 그런 균형을 가져오는데 도움이 되는 수행 중 하나가 마음 챙김 움직임입니다. 하지만 마음 챙김 움직임을 하기 전에 호범 안의 공을 통해 신경계의 균형이 의미하는 바를 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 우리가 균형을 이룰 때 우리의 신경계는 다음과 같습니다. 모든 것이 아프지 않고 이렇게 순조롭습니다. 하지만 우리가 지치고 배고프고 화가 날 때 우리의 신경계는 막힙니다. 그리고 막혔을 때 균형이 깨집니다. 마음 챙김이 하는 일 중 하나가 막힌 것을 인식하는 것입니다. 그래서 우리가 더 이상 막히지 않고 균형을 되찾는 데 도움이 되는 마음 챙김 기반 도구가 있습니다. 말씀드렸듯이 마음 챙김에 기반을 둔 도구 중 하나가 움직임입니다. 우리의 균형을 되찾도록 움직임을 통한 마음 챙김 연습을 해볼까요? 먼저 등을 곧게 펴고 근육을 편안하게 이완하며 눈 감는 게 편하다면 눈을 감고 그렇지 않다면 눈을 떠도 됩니다. 그리고 숫자를 거꾸로 세며 크게 숨을 들이쉬겠습니다. 우리는 숫자 3부터 셀 건데요. 코로 숨을 들이쉬고 입으로 숨을 내쉬며 숫자 3을 생각합니다. 이제 숫자 2를 생각하며 코로 숨을 들이쉬고 입으로 내쉽니다. 숫자 2를 생각하며 코로 숨을 들이쉬고 입으로 내쉽니다. 다시 반복합니다. 3, 2, 1. 마지막으로 3, 2, 1. 이제 손을 무릎 위에 편안하게 놓고 몸을 좌우로 흔들어 보세요. 왼쪽에서 시작했든 오른쪽이든 상관없이 좌우로 몸을 흔듭니다. 그리고 움직임의 느낌에 집중해 봅니다. 등을 곧게 편 상태로 좌우로 몸을 흔듭니다. 그리고 약간의 격려와 위로의 손길로 우리 자신을 안아볼게요. 자신을 안아주면서 계속 좌우로 움직입니다. 저는 계속 좌우로 흔들 텐데 여러분도 따라해 주세요. 이제 저는 말없이 계속 흔들 거고 여러분도 계속 좌우로 흔들면서 그 느낌을 계속 가져보길 바랍니다. 아무것도 생각하지 않아도 되지만 생각이 떠올라도 괜찮습니다. 생각을 알아차렸더라도 계속 몸을 좌우로 흔드는 것에 주의를 기울이길 바랍니다. 무엇이든 가장 편안한 상태에서 저처럼 눈을 떠도 되고, 더 편안하다면 눈을 감아도 좋습니다. 이제 손을 무릎 위에 놓고 계속 좌우로 흔들면서 주의를 기울이세요. 격려와 위로의 손길로 한 손을 올려 가슴에 얹고 계속 좌우로 흔듭니다. 생각이 떠올라도 괜찮습니다. 자신의 생각을 알아차리고 움직임의 느낌이나 가슴 위에 손이 닿는 느낌에 다시 주의를 기울입니다. 잠깐 움직임을 멈추고 눈을 뜨거나 감아주세요. 그리고 가만히 있으면서 가슴 위에 올려놓은 손에 전해지는 호흡의 움직임을 느껴보세요. 생각이 떠올라도 괜찮습니다. 원래 마음은 그렇습니다. 그저 알아차리고 호흡의 느낌에 주의를 기울이며 호흡에 따라 손이 올라갔다 내려오는 걸 느껴봅니다. 잘하셨습니다. 손을 무릎에 편안하게 다시 내려놓으세요. 잠시 가만히 있습니다. 감사할 일이 생각난다면 조용히 표현해 보세요. 이제 눈을 떠서 손가락과 발가락을 움직여 봅니다. 마음 챙김은 우리가 어딘가에 막혔을 때 종종 균형을 잡아줍니다. 막혀서 균형을 맞추기 어려울 때 마음 챙김이 이것을 알아차리도록 도움을 주며 균형을 이루는 상태로 우리를 다시 데려옵니다. 마음 챙김과 알아차림, 연민 수행을 제가 좋아하는 이유는 우리 모두가 더 행복하고 건강하며 생산적인 삶을 만드는 보편적인 자질을 인식하는 데 도움이 됩니다. 또한 마음 챙김과 명상 수행은 이러한 자질을 개발하고 더 강하게 만드는 데 도움이 됩니다. 그래서 마음 챙김과 명상을 통해 우리 모두가 가진 내면의 자질을 어떻게 더 강하게 만들 수 있는지는 제게 매우 흥미진진합니다. 오늘 우리가 함께 배울 자질은 인내인데요. 제 인생은 물론 그 어느 때보다 요즘은 인내가 중요한 것 같습니다. 그럼 오늘 우리는 어떻게 인내심을 기를지 마음 챙김 듣기를 통해 마음 챙김을 연습해 볼까 합니다. 준비되셨나요? 좋습니다. 앉거나 서거나 누워서 가장 편안한 자세를 취해 봅니다. 허리를 곧게 펴고 몸을 편안하게 합니다. 눈을 감고 마음 챙김으로 듣는 것이 더 쉽기 때문에 원하시면 눈을 감아도 됩니다. 그러나 뜨는 것이 더 편안하다면 그것도 괜찮습니다. 준비되셨나요? 좋아요. 현재 순간에 주목해 보겠습니다. 저는 눈을 감을 건데 여러분도 그렇게 하길 바랍니다. 여러분이 무엇을 느끼고 생각하는지를 주목해 보세요. 여러분의 몸은 어떤가요? 푹 쉬었거나 편안하거나 긴장되나요? 어떻게 느끼는지 알아차리고 잠시 머리 꼭대기의 느낌에 주의를 기울여 보세요. 이제 주의를 턱으로 옮깁니다. 그 기분이 어떤지 이리저리 턱을 움직여 보고 부드럽게 풀어도 보고 미소도 띄워 봅니다. 어깨도 어떤 느낌인지 뒤로 젖히거나 가슴을 펴봅니다. 이제 우리 몸이 무엇을 느끼는지 알아차렸습니다. 그러면 우리 마음은 어떨까요? 많은 생각으로 바쁜가요? 마음이 차분하고 평화롭거나 조용한가요? 아니면 어떤 큰 감정이 일어나고 있나요? 그저 주목하세요. 그것이 마음 챙김이며 우리는 일어나는 일을 알아차릴 뿐입니다. 바꾸려 하지 마세요. 도움이 되지 않습니다. 그저 허용하고 알아차리며 보고 그대로 둡니다. 지금 한번 해보세요. 몸은 편안해집니다. 그리고 몸과 마음이 어떤지 알아차리고 가슴으로 이동하여 호흡의 느낌에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 가슴에 손을 대고 숨이 올라가고 내려가는 것을 느낄 수 있습니다. 이제 눈을 감고 기다리며 다음에 무슨 일이 일어나는지 지켜봅니다. 소리가 들리나요? 이건 어때요? 계속 소리를 듣고 있었나요? 다시 들려드릴게요. 이번에는 조금 부드럽게 해볼게요. 어떤가요? 이번에는 더 크게 해볼 테니 가능한 소리에 집중해 보세요. 이번 소리는 빨랐죠? 어땠나요? 어떤 기분이 드나요? 몸은 어떤 기분이죠? 다른 소리를 들려드릴게요. 이번에는 크고 시끄러운 소리를 들어보겠습니다. 어떤가요? 몸에서도 느꼈나요? 몸 어디에서 느꼈나요? 다시 한번 들려드릴게요. 저는 소리가 오랫동안 맴도는데요. 여러분은 어떤가요? 소리와 함께 머물러 보세요. 다시 한번 들려드릴 테니 소리를 처음부터 끝까지 들어보세요. 저는 아직도 들려요. 이제 조용한 소리를 들려드릴게요. 조용한 소리는 어떤가요? 들리시나요? 소리와 함께 머물 수 있었나요? 어떤가요? 조용한 소리와 큰 소리 사이에 어떤 차이가 일어나는지 볼게요. 가능하면 소리에 머물러 주세요. 같았나요? 아니면 다른가요? 소리와 함께 머물러 주세요. 좋아요. 이제 다른 소리를 들어볼까요? 준비됐나요? 몸을 흔들어 소리를 털어보세요. 그리고 손을 비벼보세요. 편안한 상태로 돌아옵니다. 무슨 소리가 나올지 기다려 볼게요. 소리가 들리나요? 무슨 소리일까요? 하나도 안 들리나요? 소리를 키워볼게요. 이제 들리나요? 지금은 어때요? 소리가 들리나요? 무엇인지 맞춰보세요. 소리가 느려지면 어떤지 볼까요? 느낌이 어땠나요? 몸에서 어떤 기분이 들었나요? 마음은 어떤가요? 소리가 빠르면 어떤지 들려드릴게요. 몸에서 다른 기분이 들었나요? 마음은요? 빠른 소리로 다시 들어볼게요. 다시 편안한 상태로 돌아옵니다. 또 다른 소리가 들리는지 확인해 보세요. 다음은 뭘까요? 다음 소리가 무엇인지 맞춰보세요. 무슨 소리일까요? 한번 들어보세요. 계속 들어보세요. 무슨 소리일까요? 기분이 어떠세요? 몸은요? 소리와 함께 끝까지 머물 수 있나요? 이제 편안한 상태로 돌아옵니다. 이것이 바로 그 소리예요. 좋아요. 마지막 소리가 남았는데 준비되셨나요? 몸을 흔들어 보고 손을 비벼 봅니다. 호흡을 느끼며 어깨를 낮추고 편안한 상태로 돌아갑니다. 우리가 인내심을 수행하고 있다는 것을 기억하고 잠시 기다려 봅니다. 소리를 기다려 봅니다. 그리고 소리가 들리면 끝까지 머물러 봅니다. 들리나요? 머물러 있나요? 마음이 방황하면 다시 소리로 되돌아옵니다. 저는 아직 들리는데 여러분은 어떤가요? 다시 한번 들려드릴게요. 앉거나 서거나 눕거나 등을 곧게 펴고 몸을 편안하게 유지합니다. 소리를 찾지 말고 잠깐 기다려 봅니다. 소리에 머물러 보세요. 마음이 방황하면 소리로 되돌아옵니다. 저는 아직 들리는데 들리나요? 좋아요. 이 종으로 멋진 소리를 냈는데요. 제가 어떤 소리를 낼 수 있는지 들어보세요. 이미 소리를 들으셨을 텐데요. 엄지손가락으로 멋진 소리를 낼 수 있습니다. 이제 편안한 상태로 되돌아옵니다. 먼저 몸을 흔들어서 불안과 분주함 같은 에너지를 털어버리고 손을 비비세요. 편안한 자세로 돌아와 등을 곧게 펴고 손은 가슴에 얹고 호흡합니다. 호흡을 느끼며 손이 움직이는 것을 느껴보세요. 눈을 감고 소리가 날 때까지 기다립니다. 소리와 머물면서 다음 일어날 일을 기다려봅니다. 계속 들어봅니다. 소리와 함께 머무르세요. 편안한 자세로 돌아옵니다. 손은 무릎 위나 옆에 두고 등을 곧게 펴니다. 안정을 찾는 데 도움이 되면 심장에 손을 대고 호흡을 느껴보세요. 준비가 되었으면 눈을 뜨고 손가락과 발가락을 움직여 보세요. 분주함과 에너지를 털어버리고 편안한 상태로 돌아옵니다. 오늘 저와 함께 마음 챙김을 연습하기 위해 시간을 내주셔서 감사합니다. 언제 어디서든 마음 챙김 듣기를 통해 인내심을 개발할 수 있음을 기억하시기 바랍니다. 제가 마음챙김 수행을 좋아하는 이유 중 하나는 우리가 더 행복하고 기쁘고 생산적인 삶을 살기 위해 보편적인 자질을 인식하고 발전시키고 강화하는 데 도움이 되기 때문입니다. 그리고 마음 챙김으로 우리가 발전하는데 크게 도움이 되는 자질 중 하나는 우리가 통제할 수 없는 삶의 일부를 받아들이도록 합니다. 그렇다고 더 나은 삶을 살기 위한 노력, 스스로를 위해 멋진 삶을 살기 위한 노력을 포기한다는 뜻이 아닙니다. 아무것도 할 수 없는 상황을 그대로 인지하고 보는 것을 의미합니다. 우리는 놓아버리는 법을 배우며 때때로 우리를 괴롭히는 것을 생각하기보다는 그냥 놓아줍니다. 그래서 허용하고 그대로를 받아들이며 집착할 때는 놓아주도록 하는 마음챙김 수행이 있는데요. 풍선과 관련이 있어 오늘 이 풍선을 가지고 왔습니다. 지금은 풍선을 치워두고요. 조금 있다 연습해 볼게요. 준비되셨나요? 등을 곧게 펴고 몸을 편안하게 합니다. 저처럼 다리 꼬고 앉을 수도 있고 바닥에 발을 평평하게 놓고 앉을 수도 있으며 서 있을 수도 있고 누울 수도 있습니다. 중요한 것은 여러분이 편안해야 합니다. 앉거나 서거나 누워 편안한 자세를 찾아보세요. 그리고 괜찮다면 눈을 감아보세요. 저는 잠시 눈을 감겠습니다. 편안하지 않다면 눈을 떠도 되지만 머릿속에 무언가를 상상하는 시각화를 해볼 텐데 눈을 감는 것이 더 도움이 됩니다. 저는 눈을 감을 거고 여러분도 그러길 바랍니다. 머리 꼭대기를 느끼며 시작해 볼게요. 손으로 만져서 느끼는 것이 아니라 손은 편안하게 무릎 위에 얹은 채 머리 꼭대기의 감각에 주의를 기울여 보세요. 눈 주위의 느낌에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 턱의 느낌은 어떤가요? 긴장했다면 움직여서 풀어봅니다. 미소를 지어보세요. 웃을 때 느낌이 다르죠? 어깨에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 만약 귀까지 올라왔다면 어깨를 편안하게 풀어서 내려봅니다. 가슴에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 원하면 가슴에 손을 얹어 움직임에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 등 아래에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 손이 무릎 위에 있거나 옆에 있으면 어떤 느낌인지 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 배를 느껴봅니다. 손을 위에 얹어 배가 올라오고 내려가는 걸 느껴봅니다. 넓적다리에 주의를 기울여 봅니다. 무릎에 주의를 기울여 느껴본 뒤 종아리도 느껴보세요. 이제 발을 느껴봅니다. 괜찮다면 눈을 감고 여러분을 괴롭히는 것을 떠올려 보세요. 떠오르나요? 여러분을 괴롭히는 것을 떠올려 보세요. 여러분을 괴롭히는 것을 떠올려 보세요. 그런 다음 여러분을 괴롭히는 것을 이 풍선 안에 넣으세요. 풍선 속 작은 점들이 여러분들을 괴롭히는 것들입니다. 아파서 학교 소풍 때 동물원에 못 가본 것일 수도 있고 기분이 우울한 걸 수도 있으며 아마 여러분 모두 그런 경험이 있을 겁니다. 또 누군가가 여러분을 괴롭힌 걸 수도 있는데요. 여러분을 괴롭히는 것들을 이 풍선 안에 넣는다고 상상해 보세요. 눈을 다시 감고 괴로움들이 풍선 안에 있다고 상상해 보세요. 이제 그 풍선을 놓아주세요. 그리고 여러분을 괴롭히는 게 무엇이든 하늘로 날아갈 겁니다. 여러분을 괴롭히는 것과 풍선에게 잘 가라고 작별 인사를 해볼까요? 풍선이 멀리 멀리 날아가서 행복하게 지내고 건강하고 평온하기를 바라봅니다. 오늘 저와 함께 마음 챙김을 연습해 주셔서 감사합니다. 즐거운 시간이었기를 바랍니다. 마음 챙김과 명상이 어떻게 보편적인 자질을 인식하고 우리의 삶을 더 편안하고 행복하고 건강하게 만드는지 명상과 마음 챙김 수행을 통해 그 자질들이 강화되는 것을 보셨습니다. 도움되셨기 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
By first understanding ourselves, becoming more familiar with ourselves, we can then better understand others and better understand the world around us. When we work with caregivers, we encourage them to start with their personal development first. Work on your own self, on your own awareness, on your own understanding of how the world works and becoming more familiar with your own thoughts, sensations, and reactions. And after that, we bring that out into the world and consider sharing this, what we've learned in these practices with others. Now, as a practical matter, there is a ripple effect. We don't need to do anything to share the benefits of our practice with others, because if we become a little bit less neurotic, a little bit less reactive, a little bit more open-hearted, open-minded, and kinder and compassionate, just that shift in ourselves, that change in our own system changes the entire system around us. There's a ripple effect. So that ripple effect that we're talking about is the effect that happens just naturally when we take some time to understand ourselves better. That's really helpful if you're working with caregivers of parents or teachers or doctors or nurses, because they tend not to be willing to carve out time for themselves. They will carve out time to do almost anything to help somebody else. But if they feel that what they're doing is self-help, they put that aside in service of others. So if we can reframe this for them and explain to them that by understanding themselves better, by taking better care of themselves, they in turn will be able to help others more. Often that's the shift in perspective that offers or allows buy-in into this work from caregivers who are so other-centric that they rarely take time for themselves. So I'm going to talk to you about the Inner Kids model here. Just a brief background. We've been around for over 25 years. The research on the Inner Kids Elementary program was published in 2010, and it was one of the first peer-reviewed, controlled trial school-based programs in the field to be published. And the work in the Inner Kids program is on offering secular mindfulness practices to children of all ages and to their caregivers, which means teachers, parents, therapists, and pretty much anybody who works with kids. So in the Inner Kids program, we have three baskets or three large umbrellas of qualities that are developed and highlighted. The first is attention, the second is balance, and the third is compassion, what we call the ABCs. And these qualities, the development of these qualities is a bit of a progression, but it's not an entirely linear one. It's helpful to view these qualities as developing attention and balance and compassion, but honestly, it's more of a circular, more of a spiral development than a linear development, and that the development of these qualities may seem very modest at first, but you'll see that it's meaningful and that it grows stronger over time. So, by developing attention, balance, and compassion, these three qualities, these three golden threads that are laced through all of our navigation of daily life, we also build 6 social, emotional, and academic life skills that are very usable, trainable skills to help us solve problems and help us work with the issues that come up in our lives. Those 6 qualities are focusing, quieting, seeing, reframing, caring, and connecting. We'll talk about them in more detail as we progress through this presentation. And you'll see that focusing is at the center of this graphic and that it's a little bigger than the others. And that's because focusing is necessary. The capacity to attend is really necessary to bring any of these other life skills online. It's very tough to quiet your nervous system if you don't have attentional skills. Tough to see things, reframe them, and move toward caring and connecting if you don't have good, steady, stable, pliable attention skills. So that's why focusing is at the center and why the swish for it or the icon for it is a little bit bigger than the others. You'll also see I don't have these life skills in a linear progression. I have them more circular with arrows pointing around to each other because that really is how they develop. There's a sequence to them, to be sure, but really they are all constantly related to one another, changing and connected to each other. So, in addition to the qualities, in addition to the life skills, there are also universal themes that we teach kids and caregivers that are connected to classical contemplative practices. So, over thousands of years, contemplatives have compiled an extensive catalog that maps our inner and our outer world, including a set of themes that support and inform a wise and compassionate worldview. So in the Inner Kids model, and you can see this on the website at susankaisergreenland.com, you look towards Inner Kids, you'll see universal themes. You can click on it and you'll see the themes that we have identified in this program. And those themes basically are acceptance and appreciation and attention, attunement, behavioral restraint, contemplative restraint, cause and effect, clarity, compassion, discernment, empathy, everything changes, interdependence, joy, kindness, motivation, open-mindedness, patience. As time passes, the older I get, the more I appreciate the importance of patience in this work, present moment, self-compassion, and wise confidence. So we use a number of contemplative methods that have been developed over the millennia to build, to train, to evolve, to develop these trainable life skills. And the ones that we primarily use in the Inner Kids program are anchor practices. Those are where we anchor our attention, where we gather our attention around a single object. So we do that, maybe we're paying attention to the sensory experience of the feeling of our movement of breath, or to a sound, or to a picture in our head. That's visualization. We practice body scans where we bring awareness to our body. We practice movement, so we are not always sitting still when we move, when we practice mindfulness and meditation with kids and adults. Open awareness and analytical practices where we think through different problems, to be sure, but also think through different ways of perceiving our experiences and the world around us. So here's a chart, if this might help you, a grid. One of the schools I worked with for years said, Susan, get me a grid. So that's how we developed it. And this gets you a sense of how these different elements work together. There's a qualities, attention, balance, and compassion. There are life skills, focusing, quieting, caring, reframing, seeing, connecting, the contemplative methods I mentioned, anchor practices, awareness practices, analytical practices, body scans, and movement, and themes. And here are just a few of the selected ones that could fit on the slide, like open-mindedness, like appreciation, like interconnection, like how everything changes, like being helpful, just plain old helpfulness, and about letting go and letting be. So in the Inner Kids model, we teach or we practice our mindful games through a sequence that closely tracks the scientific method: play, practice, share, and apply. So with play, the first thing we do is we have some fun. That makes mindfulness more fun for kids, which is really, really important to me. And it also brings them to the practice with a smile on their face rather than a grim determination that, oh, I'm going to meditate and be mindful and improve. So instead, we come having some fun with some relaxation, with some joy. And then we play a mindful game, either standing or sitting down or walking or lying down, where we observe or become familiar with our minds and our bodies. And then we talk about what happened. That's the sharing piece. So it's play, practice, share, apply. The sharing piece is we talk about our experience. I think this is really, really important when working with kids, because kids are very often what we call a conscript audience. They didn't choose to be with us. Their moms or their dads or their teachers or their therapists or their grandparents thought it was a good idea. And so we want to hear what comes up in their minds and their body so that we can help them understand it, contextualize it, and perhaps normalize it. And then the last is apply. We want to be able to help kids apply what they learn, the skills they learn, to their daily lives. This is really, really important, because for kids to buy into this practice, especially if it wasn't their idea in the first place, it's very important that they understand how this is helpful to them. So the questions on this level, or this subdivision called apply, those questions are about applying what we learn to our real life situations. So this framework provides a safe and a contained space for kids and adults to speak openly with one another and to practice together. And this in and of itself is no small thing. It's through these conversations that kids can develop healthy, attuned, and attached relationships to other people, and healthier, more attuned relationships with themselves. So the mindfulness and meditation that we teach is taught largely through activities, activity-based mindfulness, largely through games, and games that can often be dropped right on in to the daily routine of classrooms and families and clinicians everywhere. The first quality of the first of the three qualities, attention, balance, and compassion, is attention or awareness. And some of these practices are something we would call concentration practices. They're usually the starting point for mindfulness and meditation, regardless of the age, because they're developmentally appropriate at absolutely every level. And they help people manage anxiety. They help people manage rumination, and they help people develop a greater capacity for self-regulation and for restraint. So under this general umbrella of attention or awareness come the two life skills, quieting and focusing. Sometimes kids and parents and caregivers, they need help tolerating levels of stress and strong feelings that can feel intolerable, and they want that help fast. So mindfulness-based quieting tools, which require some focused attention, provide surprisingly quick, short-term relief from overwhelming emotions. So the basic principle on how we use mindfulness-based strategies to downregulate our nervous system and to calm is that we move our attention away from what's bothering us to a neutral, a pleasant, or to a neutral or a pleasant present moment experience. And of course, to do that, you need strong attention or some attention at least, and that's why the quieting strategies are paired with focusing. So it's important to understand the relationship between mindfulness, stress, and the nervous system. If you're looking for secular mindfulness for calming strategies, for stress reduction, for largely therapeutic reasons, it's really key that you have a real general, at least a general basic understanding of how our nervous systems work and how kids' nervous systems work. So we talk to kids about their nervous system, and we talk about the system as being a little like an inner watchdog. It's an ancient survival mechanism that's in place to keep us safe. So that inner watchdog of ours, our nervous system, its job is to keep an eye out for danger. And when it senses danger, it protects us by activating the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS for short. Sorry, that's a lot of S's right there. The SNS for short. And shifting into a reactive mode called fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze is a survival mechanism that we're born with. It gives us the energy to respond skillfully when we are in danger. How? By releasing hormones like adrenaline that make our hearts beat faster and that increase the speed of our breathing and the blood flow to our muscles. When all that energy is directed toward survival, that doesn't leave as much energy for our critical thinking capacities. And so when our energy is focused on fighting or fleeing or freezing, we don't have as much energy as we usually do to think, to listen, to learn, and to be open to new ideas. So all stress is not the same. The fight, flight, or freeze reaction response, it's a life-saving reaction to physical danger, like a fire or a car crash or a tiger chasing us in the jungle. But sometimes everyday stress leads us to respond as if we are in physical danger when we really aren't. This becomes a problem when our stress response is continually triggered by things like getting good grades at school or wanting to be liked on social media or fighting with or navigating problems with our siblings or our parents. So when the stress response gets activated by worrisome thoughts like I'm going to fail, I'm not good enough, I don't have any friends, when that happens, we can end up creating an environment where it feels like we're actually in danger, but we're not. And when our stress response gets triggered for too long or too often by pressures like these, we can feel mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted. So there's a law called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And the Yerkes-Dodson law is this idea of finding the just right level of stress. I think of it a little bit like Goldilocks in the Three Bears. What is just the right amount of level of stress, the amount that gives you enough activation that you're alert, that healthy amount of stress, but not so much that you tip over into fight, flight, or freeze. So one of the things, this image that's up, I really, really like this slide of that law, the Yerkes-Dodson law, because it shows you that when you're at the top of the slide, the guy in the yellow shirt, that's when you're your best. You're alert, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. You've got just enough pressure to have you your brain light up and be interested and engaged, but not so much that you're going to tip over one side or other side of this curve. One side of the curve, the guy in the red shirt, is one that we're all familiar with. It's when people go into fight or flight. People can be reactive, people can be angry, people can be loud. It's really easy to identify. The other side of the curve, though, is one that often gets missed in our work with kids and teenagers. And that's when people withdraw. They go more into the freeze mode. They pull back. When our kids spend a lot of time in their room, when they spend a lot of time by themselves, kind of closed down, it's easy not to see that as a response to just a little bit too much stress. So what we're looking for is that just right level of stress, enough to make us alert, active, engaged, but not so much that it tips us over into fight, flight, or freeze, or in fight or flight, or in the other direction to freeze. So some people think of the stress response system as a light switch. It's an on or off switch, but that's really not the case. It's more like a dimmer switch that makes the light brighter or softer. And that's how we find that just right level of pressure. Sometimes kids don't relate so well to the idea of a light dimmer switch. They relate more to the idea of a sound fader, where you fade the sound up or down until you find just the right volume that works for you. So as I've been talking about, some stress or pressure is healthy. Too little pressure, we're not motivated to do anything. Too much pressure, and we close down, we feel stressed, we feel anxious. We do our best when we have that just right level of pressure. Mindfulness is very, very helpful here, because mindfulness helps us notice when we're under pressure and where that dimmer switch, that fader is set, if it's too bright or if it's too dim. If it's too low, if it's too dim, mindfulness can help us dial it up with specific mindfulness-based practices that make us more alert and more energized. If it's too bright, mindfulness can help us dial it back with specific practices that help down-regulate our system and ground us more. Balance is the key to this process. And mindful strategies help you find that balance, that just right level of pressure, so you can do things you need to do without feeling exhausted or overwhelmed. So I was telling you how mindfulness is like an inner watchdog, and that it can help us find balance by knowing where that dimmer switch is set and whether it's too high or too low. And that's really the difference between a mindful watchdog, one that can discern, can help you understand where your dimmer switch is set, and just the plain old nervous system watchdog, which is going to react in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, depending on the input that it receives. So that's why the development of mindfulness is so helpful, is it adds a level of discernment to this function of our nervous system that is happening already. So our mental response to stress really changes depending how our bodies feel. So there's a connection between stress and tension, and that's what I want to talk about next. When we're stressed, our minds and our bodies constrict and they get very tight. So when that dimmer switch is set high, our minds tend to get tighter, and so do our bodies. And when we tense up, it's harder to listen, it's harder to learn, it's harder to be open to new ideas. So we've talked about how when our SNS is activated, our body releases adrenaline and our heart rate and our breathing speed up. Those are reasons that our minds and our bodies tense up. It's no wonder, because we are pushing for survival. So to manage stress when we are not in a situation that is life-threatening, it's very helpful to notice the sensation of stress in your body, to notice that you're feeling stress, your shoulders, your back, your neck, and then bring gentle awareness to those areas and see if you can soften and relax. And when your body softens and relaxes, your mind tends to relax and open and broaden too. So that's one of the mindfulness-based strategies that we use is we notice the tension in our body. And when our body is tense because of stress, we respond through relaxation. And then we are often pleasantly surprised that our mind then responds too. So when we relax our bodies, our minds tend to open. When we are stressed, our minds tend to get tense. So you see these two pictures here. You can see the guy in the green chair. His whole body is tensed up, and you can tell that his mental bandwidth is limited. And that's because he's feeling under pressure and stress. But when you relax, you can see the guy in the orange chair. He is feeling more open. He's feeling more relaxed in both his body and his mind. And that's why we teach kids that minds change bodies and bodies change minds. And this is another one of these key points that I hope that you take home with you from this presentation, is that mindfulness is not all about working with our minds, although that's certainly part of it, but it's awareness of our minds and our bodies in the world around us and seeing the relationship between all of it. And especially in connection with minds and bodies, we see that if we're not very successful in helping our minds get more open, that we can shift our attention to our bodies and relax tension, and the body change will change the mind. And similarly, if we're finding that our bodies are feeling tight and we are having a hard time relaxing, that if we shift our attention to our mind and relax our minds, that our bodies will also respond by relaxing. So minds change bodies and bodies change minds. One way that we teach kids about how minds change bodies and bodies change minds is by using a snow globe. Remember, I was telling you about mindfulness-based strategies where we move our attention away from what we're thinking about to a present moment sensation that is neutral or pleasant. And the snow globe is a great way to show kids how that works. So you see, if you look through this globe, you can see I feel still and I feel centered and I feel grounded right now. And you can see through the clear globe to the other side, right? That's how we feel when we are grounded. We're able to see to the other side, but sometimes we get under stress or we've got a lot of worries or concerns, and that's like the snow in the snow globe. And look, I can't see through to the other side anymore. With mindfulness, we stop thinking about what we're worried about and we move our attention instead to perhaps the feeling of the breath or just watching the snow settle. And when we do that, look what happens. Everything settles down at the bottom and soon we can see through the globe again. See? But when we get upset or nervous, look what can happen. It can be tough to see clearly. So what do? Again, we move our attention away from worrying about our thoughts or worrying about our stress into a present moment experience, like feeling the movement of breath or watching the snow. And sure enough, we can see clearly again. So this glitter ball really is a great way to show kids what happens when our minds get busy and how then it's tough to see clearly, and what happens when we ground ourselves by moving our attention to something other than what we're thinking about, and how that helps settle the glitter. This is also, if you're a parent, an amazing, it's almost a magical practice, I've got to tell you. If you put something like this on your kitchen counter and at some point you're feeling like you're not seeing clearly, you're feeling overwhelmed, then you can just pick it up and say, hey, to your children, look, at mommy's mind feels like this right now. So can you just hang out with me for a second and just feel your breathing with me, or watch the snow settle with me, and see if we can mommy can settle her mind and settle her body so that I can see more clearly. And when we model that for our kids, when we're feeling out of sorts, that is really the most powerful mindfulness practice of all. So that was attention. Now let's look at the quality of balance. Emotional balance really helps kids navigate the ups and downs of daily life. And so that's what we're going to be working with in this section, using these life skills, focusing and seeing. One of the favorite definitions or descriptions I have of mindfulness is the idea of mindfulness as a mirror. It's a mirror of what's happening now. So that mirror accurately reflects what's happening in our inner and outer worlds, and we see what's happening without an additional layer of thoughts, emotions, and stories that can blur the reflection. So we have a couple of stances of attention that we teach kids about. One is the spotlight, which is a focused attention, focusing on one thing and ignoring distractions. And the other is the floodlight of attention. It's a wider, more open stance of attention that includes absolutely everything in our experience. When we're mindful, we use both the floodlight and the spotlight stances of attention. So we become more familiar with thoughts and emotions and opinions and reactions and sensations, not because we want to change them, not because we want to get rid of them, not because we want to embrace some of them and push some of them aside, but so that we become comfortable with the full range of activity in our minds and so that we better understand it. When we see our minds more clearly and we better understand our minds, then we can next better see and understand other people's minds and their hearts and their bodies, their thoughts, emotions, reactions, opinions too. So again, it starts with inner work, inner understanding, inner familiarization to help us better understand other people and the world around us. So what do we do? Big feelings, busy minds, they are going to come up during meditation. And what do we do then? When we're mindful, we become more familiar with these things, but some of them may come up and sometimes they may be difficult to navigate and they may be overwhelming. So when that happens, we do something that you might not exactly expect. One of the things we forget is that thoughts generate more thoughts. And there was a social psychologist named Dan Wagner who did a social experiment that really helped us understand what that looks like. So I'd like you to practice that social experiment with me for a second. And I'd like you for one moment or two, try not to think about a pink elephant. What happens when you try not to think about a pink elephant? Can you push the idea of a pink elephant away? Can you get rid of the idea of a pink elephant? More often than not, what happens is the more you try not to think about a pink elephant, the more a pink elephant comes to mind. So this idea that what we resist tends to persist is a very, very important and useful idea in all of mindfulness meditation. And it starts with this idea that when we're practicing, we're not trying to get rid of thoughts. We're not trying to get rid of emotions. We're not trying to get rid of thinking about pink elephants. We just develop a wide, spacious, open stance of attention with plenty of room for all of it. So we let it all come, we let it all go, and we do our best not to engage with these thoughts that come to mind. So when we become more mindful, when we become more familiar with our thoughts, then we can see our minds more clearly. But again, like I said, even with these skills, even with this understanding, sometimes big and overwhelming emotions come to mind. So when that happens, we give kids strategies to use if they start feeling overwhelmed by big feelings. Here are a few of them right now. If your mind is busy and it's hard to relax, we encourage you to sit and focus and silently say in when you breathe in and out when you breathe out. It's that simple. In, or out. Another one, if you're feeling really overwhelmed, and this works whether you're practicing mindfulness or meditation, or just in the middle of a stressful situation at home or at work or at school, just breathe in for 4, hold your breath for as long as it's comfortable, and then breathe out for 8. The breathing in for 4, holding the extended out breath has a way of settling your nervous system, slowing your heartbeat, and helping you to feel more grounded. Another great thing to do when you're feeling that strong emotions are bubbling up or your mind is very busy is just to move. You can get up and move from your chair, but you can also move in your chair, just silently swaying back and forth. You can shake and shake out nervous energy. You can rub your hands like this. Meditation and mindfulness does not need to be all sitting still, and that's really important when we're working with kids. So moving and shaking and dancing, those are other ways to manage strong emotions in busy minds when they bubble up. Walking is a really great way to manage strong emotions in busy minds. You can just take whatever practice you're doing and do it in connection with a walk. And then, of course, if these strong emotions come up and it's tough to manage them, even with these strategies we've given you, take a break, whether it's a short break of just a second or two, open your eyes if your eyes are closed, or if it's a longer break where you take a break and come back the next day. All of that is fine. Remember early on, I told you that more and more I'm seeing how patience might be the most critical universal theme for us to develop and embrace, period, but especially when we're working with kids and families. Well, you can take a break and come back tomorrow. There's plenty of time to become more familiar with our minds and bodies. So if you're facilitating classes, I want you to know a couple of these basic rules to handle strong emotions that come up in mindfulness class. One, keep your eyes open when leading a reflective practice so that you can see what's happening with the people in your group. If somebody, a child or an adult, seems particularly restless or overwhelmed, it's okay, just skillfully end the practice. Acknowledge feelings that come up without drawing too much attention to them. When appropriate, ask for group support. How many of you have felt something the same or similar? Show your hands. Contain the discussion. A tender topic can quite quickly be the subject of playground conversation or lunchroom conversation. So have a referral system in place, a supervisor or a peer support. So if something does come up in a group you're facilitating, you're not quite sure about how to handle, that you can talk to others and then always come back to your group and see if there's something else that you want to do to provide support and understanding. So a little bit more on the quality of balance and the life skills now of seeing and reframing. One of the pieces of the puzzle, the nervous system puzzle in this work, is the idea of the negativity bias. And our brains are wired for survival. And one way that we're wired for survival is to focus more on experiences that feel threatening and dangerous than those that feel positive and uplifting. So this is called the negativity bias, and it was really essential to our ancestors' survival. Unfortunately, right now, it's not as helpful often because often what happens, we don't have the same physical threats to our survival, but still we tend to focus more on the difficulty, more on the challenges than the positive or the good that's happening in our life. So it's easy to get caught in a mental loop of thinking about our problems, especially during hard times. But if we learn to interrupt that mental loop, not pretend the problems don't exist, not ignore or deny the problems, but just interrupt the loop of thinking about them all the time and take a moment to see the beautiful flower in the yard and appreciate it, or feel the sun on your face or the wind, or enjoy your comfortable bed or some time with friends or family. That helps us break the mental loop of thinking about the difficulties and make room for gratitude and appreciation to emerge naturally. So, appreciation is a key part of this work. And when challenging circumstances show up, it's so easy to focus on what's going wrong and not on what's going right. So, when we take more time to focus on what we're thankful for, we have studies now that show that that type of appreciation helps us become more resilient when life is hard. It helps us to maintain our optimism. It increases our feelings of happiness. It even strengthens our immune system, and it promotes feelings of forgiveness and kindness to others. So surprisingly, it doesn't take a lot of time to experience these benefits, which is why we really encourage you in your work with kids and your work on your own to take in some time to just soak in the good. Next, remember we had the quality of attention, balance, now compassion. And let's talk a little bit about that and the life skills of caring and connecting. We often talk about connecting to other people, and with kids especially, we talk about kindness and compassion to other people and often forget to encourage them to connect to themselves, to be attuned to themselves, to be kinder and more compassionate to themselves. So we also connect to nature in a natural and an uncontrived way. And we connect to other people with a less guarded and a more relaxed and a more open mind. So when we are working with these life skills of caring and connecting, often we have to work with or consider conflict. And one of the things we talk to kids and parents about in connection with conflict is something called the backward law. And sometimes the harder you pull against conflict, the stronger the conflict becomes. This is similar to that pink elephant slide we had earlier. Remember, what we resist persists. The more if you think about a pink elephant, then it's very hard to stop thinking about them. And the more you think about the pink elephant, the harder it is to stop. In the same way, in a conflict situation, often the harder you pull against that rope, if it's like a metaphorical game of tug of war, the greater the conflict becomes. So often we just ask parents, can you drop the rope? Is this something that really needs to be fought over, or is this something you can just let go? And even if it is something that feels like it has to be managed or dealt with, is this the right time to do so? So that idea of how often do you really need to stay in conflict with your child, or how often can you relax and drop the rope and let things just be and settle and take their natural course? That is one of the really wonderful dances that we play with in the practice of mindfulness and meditation. And of course, there are those times when your child is having a meltdown and you need to get someplace and you need to get into the car and you just need to scoop them up if they're crying, put them in their car seat and buckle them up. So there are times that you really do need to draw the line and you can't drop the rope. But I have found in my own personal experience and in working with other people that very frequently we're able to drop the rope and not stay engaged in a conflict more often than we at first imagine. Related to the idea of dropping the rope is the idea of letting be and letting things go. This isn't the same as giving up. This isn't the same as not trying, but it's just being realistic that right now, this is the way things are. And struggling with them in the moment isn't really going to help. Battling with them in the moment may not be helpful. Right now, I need to let go, let things be, and then I'll come back and try to make change. So, one of the things that we do with kids, one of the games that we play with them is this idea of a pink bubble. It helps you acknowledge things are difficult and then try to let them go and not dwell on them. So, how that works is we have kids imagine that whatever it is that is bothering them, they put it in a bubble. It can be a pink bubble if they like, or any color that they like. And then they watch in their imagination that bubble together with what it is that's bothering them float away. And maybe they even wave goodbye to it and wish it well. So teaching kids not to give up, but at the same time, not to battle with things where it's not going to be helpful to keep battling with them is really, really useful. And this very specific game of having, especially younger kids, imagine that whatever's bothering them, the thing that's bugging them, is in a bubble that is floating away, is a really fun and playful and useful way to demonstrate this concept.